I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, political musical chairs in the state of Israel. As we reported on JBS, the current Netanyahu coalition collapsed in late December when the ultra-Orthodox parties in the coalition pulled out, ostensibly in protest of a Knesset bill that would have required Orthodox yeshiva students to be subject to the Israeli draft and to serve in the IDF. As is true with everything in politics, everywhere, nothing is quite that simple. But the bottom line is that new Israeli elections for the 21st Israeli Knesset have been moved up to April 9th. The normal four-year term would have ended this fall, which actually means this latest coalition government has run a fairly long time, almost to term. But now there are all kinds of political machinations going on in Israel, with people changing parties or leaving parties, at least for now, such as the former Israeli U.S. ambassador Michael Oren, who's leaving the Kulanu party, in a move that has already had serious negative consequences for the Labor Party. Labor leader Avi Gabai ended his political alliance with the Hatuna party, led by Tzipi Livni. With Tzipi Livni gone from the Labor coalition, Israeli polls show that Labor would lose a good number of seats. And then there are those creating new political parties. Tzipi Livni is now reportedly looking to form a new alliance with former Israeli General and Chief of Staff Benny Gantz, who's forming his own new political party named Hosen Yisrael, which translates in English to Resilience of Israel. Interestingly enough, Benny Gantz is now seen as the leading challenger to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Then Israel's highly regarded former defense minister, Moshe Ya'alon, announced he is creating a new party named Telem as a national state party. And in another dramatic political development this week, Naftali Bennett announced he was leaving the religious Zionist party he originally created and has led since its creation in 2008, called Habayit HaYehudi, the Jewish Home Party, so that Bennett can now create another new political party of his own called Hayamin HeChadash, the New Right Party, which Bennett explains will create a partnership between Orthodox Israelis, which he has traditionally been associated with, and secular Israelis, which is a real shift in emphasis for Naftali Bennett. And Bennett did not leave the Jewish Home Party alone. Joining him in his new party is one of Israel's most prominent up-and-coming women members of the Knesset, Ayelet Shaked, Israel's Justice Minister. And then a third figure on the Israeli scene, who's beloved by many American Jews on the right, Carolyn Glick, the longtime deputy managing editor of the Jerusalem Post, will team up with Bennett and Shaked in the New Right Party. And this is only some of the major political square dancing that's dominating Israeli politics. So what's it all mean? For some penetrating insight, I'm so pleased to be joined on our JBS phones now from Jerusalem by one of the most penetrating analysts and commentators on the world Jewish scene, Gil Troy, the esteemed professor of history at McGill University, author of The Zionist Ideas, and a leading columnist for the Jerusalem Post. Gil, happy 2019 and welcome back to JBS.
Happy 2019. One of the amazing things about that wonderful introduction you gave is that's only the first week. Imagine how the chaos will grow exponentially.
Well, I want to hear your analysis. Look, there seem to be a lot of surprises on the Israeli political scene. I want to begin with Naftali Bennett, who seems to have surprised many by leaving his own party and now going on and creating the New Right Party with Ayelet Shaked and Carolyn Glick. Gil, what's your perspective on this?
So first of all, let me just say what a delight it is to be able to talk about a politics that gives surprises. In most countries in the world, there are no surprises because a dictator dictates, certainly in the Arab world. And so we should start this whole conversation by talking about how wonderful and remarkable democracy is and how wonderful and remarkable Israeli democracy is. And within that, of course, there's going to be a lot of chaos, a lot of clashing, a lot of conflict, and a lot of name-calling. And the Ayelet Shaked, Naftali Bennett surprise of the week, I think came from two different dynamics that were occurring. One, tensions within the coalition, the right-wing coalition that Benjamin Netanyahu is running, and Shaked and Bennett starting to wonder about whether they were going to be squeezed out, whether they were going to get what they wanted. And also, they come from Bayit Yehudi, the Jewish Home Party, which used to be known as the NRP, the National Religious Party, and it grew with a collaboration with other parties. And this, in fact, in many ways was Naftali Bennett's baby, Naftali Bennett's creation.
Yes.
And one of the interesting things he did when he was creating the party, traditionally the religious parties was filled with just the religious people, he reached out to Ayelet Shaked as a secular person. But the dynamics within that party had gotten so toxic, and Bennett himself had been taken to the internal party court twice in the last 2 months, that he was starting to feel a lack of maneuvering there, a lack of support. I think he was also starting to feel that the party is so connected to the settlement movement that his more expansive vision wasn't going to be welcomed. And so he basically said, okay, enough. And by coming out of the party with Ayelet Shaked and calling it the New Right, he's saying, this is a new future. Mm-hmm. We should also point out that while all the polls show that Bibi Netanyahu is leading 40, 50, 60% when people talk about who do people expect will emerge as the winner in terms of prime minister, this in many ways may be the first act in the follow-up to Bibi Netanyahu's remarkable career. The wolves seem to be howling, the vultures seem to be circling, and this could be Bennett's attempt to establish his foundation as not just a religious leader, because there's never been a religious prime minister of Israel, not from a religious party, and maybe say this is my attempt to show that I can work with secular people and that I'm really going to be the next logical successor to Bibi Netanyahu.
Okay, you make a very important point, Gil. It's as if Naftali Bennett is going out of his way to distance himself from the Orthodox community in general and, again, ultra-Orthodoxy in particular, by reaching out to secular, creating what he calls is a party that will partner with the secular Israeli community. And any idea whether the Israeli people will embrace this move by Bennett?
It's hard to tell. The first polls, I think, show him getting about 8 seats. I'm talking about an 120-person Knesset, which is a drop from his debut. He had a remarkable debut in politics 2 elections ago, where they ran these very interesting campaign commercials. Again, it was a reincarnation of the religious party, the National Religious Party, but with a secular touch, and they really talked about tradition. They talked about old-time values, and it really worked. And there was actually a nice surge that he had at the end based on those commercials. But he clearly is someone who has a big vision and big ambition, and I think it's very hard to tell kind of what are the dynamics within the Israeli populace. He's somewhat of a polarizing figure because he's been so defined as part of the religious scene,
yes,
as part of the settlement scene.
Yes.
But I think one of the things, we're speaking very much in terms of political tactics, we should also point out 2 interesting things about Bennett. One is that in addition to being the son of Americans and the American Alim, the American immigrants are often much more open-minded and flexible than those from other countries. He has a wife who he used to say was secular and turned religious. This week he started emphasizing how secular she was as a way of showing his ability to build bridges. But that shows he has a certain kind of fluidity and flexibility in his identity. He also has 2 portfolios. He's education minister.
Yes.
Which is a very kind of old-fashioned position for National Religious Party members to have had. But he also was Diaspora Affairs Minister. And I think we have to give him some credit that over the course of the last 2-3 years, he's been hearing a lot of the frustration that diaspora Jews have. He's been hearing a lot of the anger that diaspora Jews have. He's been hearing also a lot of the anger that Israeli Jews who are tired of the ultra-Orthodoxy monopoly both on civil religious matters and also on the draft issue, as you mentioned, has. And it could be that he's sensing that this might be a time to make a move, and maybe the Nixon going to China move could be the guy wearing the kippah is able to break Israel free of the anti-Zionist rabbinate, which for far too long has been blackmailing the Israeli people and, unfortunately, the Jewish people as well.
I understand. What I don't understand, Gil, is if Bennett ends up with 8 seats in the Knesset, will he demand a ministerial position? It seems to me he's going to have less power in any Knesset that evolves out of this election than he had before.
I have to say that was also my initial reaction. I was quite surprised, and because all this fragmentation also has the right in either a real panic or a fake panic, and I say that because the rhetoric that started coming from Bibi Netanyahu and others in reaction to the announcement was, oh my goodness, we're going to splinter into so many small parties that we may even have to change the electoral threshold so we can get more of us in. But the reason why I say fake panic is because one of the things that Bibi Netanyahu, you can love him or hate him, but I think this is a fact, is very good at, is creating mini crises around each election, really playing to his most base fears, and it could be that it was just kind of some good old-fashioned fear-mongering. Mm-hmm. So, but to get to the essence of your very important question, I think it gets to some of the toxic dynamics that have emerged in Israeli politics. I'm old enough to recall once upon a time that when Labour Party dominated, it never got 60 or 61 seats, that it always had to be in a coalition, but it would get 47 seats, it would get 50 seats, it would get 52 seats. The Likud also was in that range. Now, the most optimistic polls show Netanyahu getting 30 seats,
right,
which is a quarter of the Knesset.
Right.
What does that mean? That you have to go into very intense political negotiations for your coalition because you need 61 to be viable in this parliamentary democracy. And increasingly, being the head of a party gets you that Volvo, which is Israeli speak for gets you that ministry, more so than being number 3, 4, 5 on a list. And it could be that just the internal dynamics within the Bayit HaYehudi, the religious party, had gotten so problematic that Bennett said, I'm better off having me and Ayelet Shaked as 1 and 2 and being somewhat of a smaller party than getting stuck in this whole vacuum, which might play out in a negative way, even within the internal party dynamics. Okay. But it's all speculation. I mean, as I said, we could meet a week from now. There'll be even more chaos, and much of what we said today will be have been interesting, fun to talk about, but somewhat moot.
Okay, then I'll just keep talking to you next week. What about Ayelet Shaked and Carolyn Glick? Carolyn Glick is known very well in the American Jewish community, especially on the right. I don't know how she's viewed by Israelis, by Sabras. Give me a reaction to both of them, Ayelet Shaked and Carolyn Glick. How do Israelis regard them?
Okay, so let's go in 2 different directions on that one. One is that a lineup of Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, and Carolyn Glick is 3 extremely smart, extremely articulate, extremely ideological people, but also 3 extremely right-wing people. And in fact, it's almost kind of a multiplier effect, where if I broke it down, I could, as I was saying with Bennett, I could see parts of his personality which go more to the center. Ayelet Shaked has written a very interesting Thatcherite manifesto, which was so good that I included it actually in my recent book, The Zionist Ideas, that is an interesting, thoughtful, ideological attempt to explain where Israel has to go both as a society and politically. But once especially you get someone like Carolyn Glick, who is very articulate but very well known for being a bit of a flamethrower, you have a kind of solidification of the right-wing dimension of their politics. Caroline Glick, as you say, is extremely well known in the American community. She does indeed write a column in Hebrew, and she's also done some very interesting, offbeat, popular social media things. She does these video clips that she tries to make go viral, and some of them have gone viral. So she has something of a presence in the Israeli community, but I don't think she casts as large a shadow there as she does in the American community. And we should, given that we're Americans and talking in English, stop for a moment and point out two things. One is indeed how cut off much of the American conversation is from what goes on in Israel, even Americans who live in Israel. And yet, paradoxically, what we've seen over the last 3, 4, 5 election cycles is a real presence. A Dov Lipman, a Michael Oren, a Yehuda Glick, son of American parents, now Caroline Glick, no relation. So we're seeing an American presence, and that also touches on the fragmentation, which is that once upon a time with super big parties, the small American community couldn't really get much political traction. Now we're seeing, first of all, multi-generation kids who have been in Israel, who speak Hebrew beautifully, but also have that American touch, but also that ability in such a fragmented political system for someone to get a foothold and to make a difference.
Okay, you correct me if I'm wrong. I'll say this again. Caroline Glick's very popular among the American Jewish right. My sense is she doesn't have much traction in Israel with the Israeli population as a whole. Am I wrong?
No, I think that's, on the whole, that's quite correct.
Okay.
And she's also an extremely polarizing figure within the American community, right?
Yes,
as popular as she is on the right,
you're absolutely
that is how, toxic she's on the left and frankly in the center. And it's an interesting choice, again, because she's the kind of person, you're not bringing her onto your team to broaden. You're bringing her on your team to really be a kind of ideological glue and a polarizer.
Okay.
And that's a move they're making in the formation of an identity.
I understand. One more question about Bennett's political future here. If Netanyahu wins re-election for a 5th time, and again, as you indicate, the polls seem he's likely to, we don't know, but that's what's at the moment seems likely. Do you think Bennett's party will be in a Netanyahu coalition?
This is one of those things that, on the one hand, one never wants to predict. On the other hand, one can pretty much predict because, in some ways, an even better way of answering the question would be to go to Lieberman, who left the coalition a couple of weeks ago, furious at Bibi Netanyahu for not being strong enough both in Gaza fighting Hamas and in the north fighting Hezbollah. He was defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman. He walked out in a huff, and I was just listening to him on Israeli radio 2 hours ago, and it was very clear that if he's invited back into the coalition and the timing is right and the pricing is right, he'll be there. So, and frankly, they all need each other because there is there will be this need to get 60 plus 1 or 2 or 3 seats in the Knesset. So the smart money would bet on Bennett being in. And Bennett, like Lieberman, by the way, has a very complicated relationship with Bibi. They had been, they both rose up through politics as one of Bibi's key advisors and chief of staff, and then at a certain point, Netanyahu has this ability to both be an amazing scout of talent, but also someone who kind of crushes the people around him, so that he always emerges as the superhero. Ultimately, you had breakups with both of them, and they each spun off their own party.
Okay. Do you agree with the reports I'm reading that former Chief of Staff General Benny Gantz has the best chance to challenge Netanyahu?
The polls certainly suggest that. The latest poll I saw, and I have to emphasize that with both parts of the sentence, latest because things keep on changing so much, and I saw, meaning that it popped on my screen, but so many different and confusing and conflicting polls are emerging. But anyway, the latest poll I saw showed that Gantz indeed was second in the race, getting about half of what
Right.
Netanyahu is polling. But in a land of pygmies, in a land where so much of the opposition has so little traction, especially when it comes to going mano-mano or person-on-persona, I should say, against Bibi Netanyahu, Gantz emerges as at least half a Gulliver. And one of the interesting things about Gantz is that he was a very popular chief of staff, has a very nice affect, and is well known in the Israeli public, but is not very well known in terms of his domestic policies, in terms of his substantive stances, and he's the kind of person who could take off like wildfire in an election or just collapse. Mm-hmm. Remember what happened, if we can speak American politics for a moment, to Jeb Bush, who actually was a little bit better known, but he came into the 2016 election campaign with a $100 million war chest, and boom, collapsed.
Right.
Within minutes of enduring the Donald Trump onslaught.
Yes.
And you put someone like Benny Gantz, who has been chief of staff, but not really in the political thing, against a professional like Bibi Netanyahu, and who knows? It could be that Netanyahu at this point is tired. It's the 15th round. His eye is shut, and he's feeling his age, or he could still be floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee, and take him out. I just don't know.
Okay. Whenever we hear about Netanyahu and the Israeli public, there's this love-hate relationship with him. Many people don't like him at all and then say, but there's nobody better, and there's nobody better when it comes to defense. He protects Israelis. I'm wondering whether Benny Gantz has a certain kind of allure, because he's a general, and the picture is the same. We have somebody now who also would be good in defending us. What do you think of that analysis at all?
You're absolutely right. And it goes back to my comment that this is, the first day of the rest of Israel's life without Bibi Netanyahu, whether or not he wins, and even it's assuming he wins, the knives seem to be out. The possibility of him being indicted seemed to be the operative assumption on every radio show and every newspaper I read today, that one of the things we should add, again, in this incredibly crazy week, was that Attorney General Mandelblit, who ultimately has the decision in his hands whether to indict Netanyahu, sat over the last couple of days with the galaxy, the superstars of the Israeli legal system, consulting on the question of whether or not it would be appropriate, legally appropriate and ethically appropriate, to continue with the judicial process, the investigations against Netanyahu, given that Netanyahu has called elections. And the word on the street is that the consensus was absolutely. And it makes sense. Look, if I were under investigation for fraud, God forbid, and I was up for a promotion, it wouldn't, or my son's bar mitzvah, or, God forbid, a cancer treatment, it wouldn't be appropriate for the police to say, oh, well, the guy's busy, we shouldn't indict him tomorrow. I think that, and especially because Netanyahu was part of the machinations in having the election called, I think it would be outrageous for the investigative system and process to be pushed off because of it. And I would say that if I loved Netanyahu or if I hated Netanyahu,
I understand.
I think there's a question of rule of law here.
Okay. I have a couple of quick questions, but I need you to answer in side heads practically, because we're almost out of time. What's Tzipi Livni's political future?
Oh, my goodness. She had the worst week, because it wasn't just that she was fired, but she was fired publicly on national television with no idea it was coming. And watching it is just humiliating. But it was so humiliating, it was so ugly, that she lost stature, but so did Avi Gabay, the man who executed her in public.
But
I wouldn't buy any stock futures in her political career.
Okay. American Jews care about Michael Oren. Is he out of politics for good or what?
3 words. I hope not. I think he's brilliant. I think he's charismatic. I think he's principled. And I hope that he's snapped up by another party. But it goes back to my comment about there are very different realities that we have in our American conversation, even here in Israel, and the Israeli conversation. He's not as big a superstar in Israel,
Yes.
Among the Hebrew-speaking public, I should say, as he is among the English-speaking public. But he's extraordinary, and it would be a shame to see him leave politics.
By the way, quickly, did he leave or was he thrown out of Kulanu?
Yes.
Okay.
It seems that it seems that he was thrown out. But Kulanu, when you lose four of your 8 Knesset members in a week, you're imploding, and Kulanu seemed to be imploding this week.
Okay. Will the Orthodox parties be once again part of whatever coalition government emerges out of April's election?
That's been the approach since 1948. You go
Yes.
left, they'll go left. You go right, they'll go right. All you need to do is cave in to their 2 or 3 or 4 now borderline anti-Zionist demands, to my great sorrow.
So what you're saying is they are likely to still be in any new coalition government.
Right. The only scenario, the most likely scenario that would stop them would be whether there's this emergence, defying the polls right now, of a center, and there are enough votes to say to them, sayonara, baby, but it's not likely.
Okay. Last
But
question.
we can dream.
Last question. You know, there's a mood throughout the world that seems to be moving to the right, towards conservatism, toward this idea of a certain kind of isolationist nationalism. Is that in any way affecting the Israeli populace? To what extent is what we see happening in America, in Great Britain, also happening in Israel, or is there a different political reality? And you got 1 minute.
I think people are connecting the dots, but I think your second point is, I think it's more, there's an Israeli political reality. 1977, Israel started bringing in right-wing leadership, and the 1990s, the collapse of the Oslo peace process due to the failure of the Palestinians to accept our right to exist, the terrorism that goes on almost daily, those are the things that make Israelis right-wing, and the Zionist story makes them patriotic, and I don't think it's quite the same, even though Netanyahu tries to link it and Trump tries to link it.
Okay, and I think you're 100% right. You are terrific, Gil, and I always love it when we play something, an address you give somewhere, anywhere in the world, and I love it when you come on and talk to me. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha and great joy in 2019. I hope we see each other and talk often. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and clearly you're getting the monthly check from my mother for being so nice to me, so I hope it continues this year too.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Keep up
Gil,
the great work.
Thank you. Gil Troy, professor of history at McGill University. He's also the author of The Zionist Ideas, a wonderful book, and he's a leading columnist for the Jerusalem Post. So this is our first in the news of the new calendar year. I want to take a moment to thank each of you who sent me such wonderful notes and emails wishing JBS well in the new year. And thank you for your most kind words to me personally. And a huge thank you to all of you who supported JBS in 2018. We needed a big end to the calendar year, and you did it for us. And all of us here at JBS are most appreciative and most grateful, especially me. We wish every one of you in our JBS family a most healthy and fulfilling new calendar year in 2019. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, associate director, Dara Golub, editor, John McDevitt, and the producer of this edition of In the News, Tisha Bader. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.